Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. We are very sorry to start today's session so late. There was actually a major technical problem with us at the CPR, and we apologize for it. But fortunately, many of you are still here with us, and Ravi is very much with us, so we are happy to welcome him today. So Ravi Gadipalli completed his master's and PhD from IIT Delhi on public transport and planning. And before that, he had a bachelor's in civil engineering. He's based out of Bangalore, and he has more than 15 years of experience working in the sector. Ravi is today a consultant with the World Bank, where he works on public transport and electric mobility initiatives. The title for today's talk is Institutional Reforms for Scaling Up Bus-Based Public Transport in India. And Ravi will offer a baseline assessment of bus services in India. He will then discuss key gaps and tell us a bit about how new mechanisms, such as the public transport service contract in Chennai, can address some of the challenges. So Ravi, it would be great, I think, if you could, limit your talk to about 35 minutes, and then we will have still time for a good discussion. Over to you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Stephanie, and thanks to all the participants for staying back despite the technical glitch. Thanks very much for being here. So maybe I'll start my presentation quickly. I'll request you to actually tell me when I'm about to finish my scheduled time. I can go on if it, otherwise. Thank you. So today the topic has already been mentioned. So the idea is to discuss institutional reforms needed for scaling up bus-based public transport in India. And I'm Ravi, as already introduced. I work with the World Bank as a consultant on public transport and electric mobility. So World Bank has been advancing some of these institutional reforms to improve public transport in India and elsewhere also. So I've been working over the last 4 or 5 years on some of these topics. So today I'd like to share what's happening on the topic, why it is important, and what else can be done. So I mean, you're all here to talk, listen to institutional reforms. I assume you all agree that public transport is important, but just to get it out of the, just the question addressed, the reason we need public transport is we have limited space, we have more and more people, and so public transport is the most efficient way to move people around. I'm sure all of you have seen this image before, but just the statistic on the, if the actual space per person is the most efficient for buses, it's actually lesser than even a cycle. The space occupied per person is less than 1 square meter per person. And that's what many of the more advanced or developed cities do. So in cities with very good economic development, you see whether it is Paris metropolitan area, Singapore, Hong Kong, public transport mode share is more than 60%. And and it's a mix of buses and metro for sure. But in some of the cities, buses actually have more trips on them than the metro because of the local travel characteristics, affordability, for various reasons. In India, the reason, I mean, the focus on public transport has been there for more than a decade, but a lot of focus has been on metro rail systems. The point of this slide is to show that even as we focus on metro rail systems, buses still continue to be very important. And we need to have much more focus on bus-based public transport also. It is not like there is no focus on public transport and buses. So as a part of the electric bus mandate in India, the FAME scheme, faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles, both in the first phase of the scheme and the second phase of the scheme, a lot of the budget has been allocated to buses. And the second phase, FAME 2, almost 35% of the budget has been allocated to buses. And that's one of the big success stories globally, actually, on how India advanced on electric buses. Through successive rounds of procurement, we have standardized the contracts. We have actually reduced the cost of life cycle of electric bus, almost up to 25% cheaper than diesel buses. So there is progress made on electric buses, but that's more on the technology side and then maturing the technology and making it cheaper over a period of time. So this actually chart talks about what is needed. Is that enough or do we need to do more? So here we have the life cycle cost, life cycle emissions analysis of different modes of transport that were done by the World Bank and the International Transport Forum. This data is coming from that report. I worked on that, and that's why I can claim the numbers to be accurate because there's enough effort done in generating these numbers. So the point is that so if you take one bus and over the life of the bus, suppose it attracts people from cars and two-wheelers, we estimated what is the life cycle emission savings of that. And if that bus is electric instead of being diesel, what would be the additional savings accrued through that? And on top of that, electric bus is powered by renewable energy, what would be the additional saving? So what we see is that the current trend of moving from diesel buses to electric buses would still generate 460 tons on average. A 12-meter air-conditioned bus would save around 460 tons of carbon emissions. But actually, almost 3 times of that reduction can be achieved by shifting people from private vehicles to public transport and bus-based public transport. And also, there is savings from renewable energy adoption, but that's a power sector issue. That's not a transport. We can't solve that problem. There are others trying to solve it. So we'll focus on the first 2 pillars of getting more people on buses and having those buses as electric buses. So we have talked about why buses are needed and how they can provide savings, but what exists currently is that in across India, in urban, rural, intercity, the actual bus supply is only 1/3 or even 1/5 of what people actually need in terms of travel demand. And so there is a lot of proliferation of private vehicles or informal public transport or commercial transport services like taxis, three-wheelers, which take up majority of the demand. And whatever buses we have are also old fleet. Almost 50% of the buses across public bus agencies in India have passed their retirement life, but because they don't have investment, they are continuing to operate. And so this results in other modes because people don't sit at home just because there's no public transport, they take other modes. And the public transport agencies are, whatever they're operating is not being supported financially by the government for them to grow further. So they're just on survival mode, just existing wherever they are. So just to put some numbers into it, so I actually gave 2 different points previously. On one hand, there is cost reduction through electric, but then there is not enough money. So that those are contradictory points, right? So here I try to show what we are getting at. So what over the period of time Indian bus agencies had as diesel buses and operating in-house. They purchase the bus whenever there is budgetary support, hire drivers and conductors and operate the bus and maintain it and retire it, then replace it. So over a period of time, there is move to electric bus. So there is a certain cost reduction possible because of that. On top, there is also a shift in business model from in-house operation to outsourcing the bus operations, where the drivers and maintenance staff are hired by the private operators. And by design, Indian labor laws are such that public bus agencies, the staff would cost more than private agencies in terms of our daily wage labor rates and the working condition requirements. So there is some cost reduction possible through outsourcing, which already states are doing. And then there is electrification. Despite these two transitions, the cost is still higher than the revenue. This is just an indicative number to show the difference, but this is true in many of the cities and states. So there is still a funding gap because of which the bus agency is depending on the state or the municipal government to reimburse them for this, which is not happening on time in many cases. And so they are in a survival mode consistently on wherever they are. But is that an India-specific issue? In a way, it is, yes, because loss making is not an India-specific issue. If you see, these are 3 different cities we present where cities have very good public transport systems. So across these 3 cities, you will see that at least 30% of the cost is given by the government as a grant. The rest is recovered by the bus agency either through fares or non-fare revenue like commercial establishments, advertising, or other land value capture issues they can tap into. Whereas in bus agencies in India, almost 90% is self-generated, 79% through ticketing revenue, 8% uh, through commercial revenue, which is 87%, almost 90. So 87%, only limited amount provided by the government and also not on time, because of which, again, the survival thing goes on. So, but why does government not support buses? Because it is obvious, right? So they are the most efficient, space-wise, emissions-wise, affordability-wise, and our policy documents, all of them say we need more buses. But why don't government still support them? So that's because of these issues, according to us. On one hand, the government thinks that STUs are inefficient. STUs are state transport undertakings, or the bus agencies are called as STUs. So they are the government perceives them to be inefficient because they are perennially in losses. So there is this perceived notion that public transport should make profits. The governments think that there is subsidized travel, of course. Students, elderly, or sometimes women get subsidized travel or free travel, which the government reimburses. And also, governments typically provide capital incentives in the budget. So let's say I allocate some 100 crore rupees or whatever the budgetary allocation is for a given year to purchase buses. So the government expectation is that once the capital and the subsidized travel is taken care of, the bus agency should be able to recover the cost based on their own operation. But if you look at the other side, from the bus agency's side, majority of these inefficiencies are out of their control. So the staff costs are determined by the government. Fuel costs are also determined by the government. Traffic congestion leads to inefficient operations, all of which is outside the bus agency control. They also have several other obligations to serve in rural areas, in off-peak hours. So because where the demand is not meeting the profitability requirements of the service. And then the fares, even for the people who are paying for travel, are not actually paying the full cost of service delivery. They are only paying subsidized travel, and fares are one of the more political issues, so they don't get revised over a period of time. Because of all these reasons, they are in losses. So there is a conflict in between these two stances. So what we need is, we need to be having efficient services, of course. So there needs to be an incentive to perform efficiently, but at the same time, the so-called inefficiencies or losses, which are outside the bus agency control, need to be taken up by the government. So we need to move to that system eventually. So that's not the only solution, of course. There is this nice framing of the problem by Guido Brugmann, who is a consultant also, and he worked in public transport for several years. So he says that for a good public transport system to be running, it's like a house. So where you need a good foundation, which is the political support for public transport. And there are key pillars making the house stand: the legislation, organization or the institution, and the finance. So in India, we have political support to the extent that people say they want public transport. Nobody says we need to have more cars in India, unlike some other countries. We have a very strong legislation. The Motor Vehicle Act and so many other legislations actually enable public transport. Where we are slightly behind is the organization or the institutional framework and the financing, for the money for public transport. And on top, you need the implementation capacity. But today, that's not the topic. That in itself is an ocean of where else we can improve on capacity. So today, we'll focus on these two aspects: institution and finance. So this is where the whole concept of public transport service contracts is important. So this is not a new concept. It has been in European Union for a long time, since 2007, I think, where so right now the current way of functioning in India is that it is up to the STU, the state transport undertaking providing buses, to determine the level of service and deliver it. So if they are making losses, they can choose not to improve services anymore, and they just operate and exist wherever they are. But the idea here is that you need a separate authority which determines the level of service needed for the people. based on the city level objectives or the state level or national level mobility objectives. Suppose the city decides that I want a certain number of people moving on public transport. What is the level of service needed for that? Needs to be defined by some entity and given as a mandate to the bus agency. Right now, the bus agency and the authority, which is generally the transport department, in some cities it can be the municipal corporation, but as a representation, I've just put transport department to make it easy. So right now they are together. They define the service, they deliver the service, and they are where they are. So there's no actual definition of what is the required service level. They just operate whatever is available. So what is needed actually is to move to a new institutional framework where the authority or the transport department defines service levels and the STU delivers those services. So it is called the public transport service obligation set by the government and the delivery. And there is a contract which actually says this is what you deliver, and against this you will be paid the capital expenditure and the operational expenditure in order to deliver this service. And it can be a random exercise that you wake up one day and just determine this. It's actually very detail oriented and needs a lot of deliberation between these two key agencies, authority and the ST. This is just a representation of how a public transport service contract needs to be brought on board. So like I mentioned earlier, the transport department or the authority defines what is a service obligation. And how does it define? You need to have a business plan. So we can call it a business plan or a service plan or a long-term roadmap. The word, we need not be hung up on the word itself. But the idea is that you have a 5-year vision that I need to go from X to X plus delta X as my service. And what exactly is that delta X? We need to define it clearly so that it can be tracked over a period of time. So you need to define various key performance indicators as a part of this business plan. So it can be in terms of the number of buses. I'll come to the KPIs a bit later. So you define what is the service level improvement and codify that in the business plan. And at the same time, against that, once the STU delivers that quality service, the volume or the quality of service defined in the obligations, they'll be paid a viability gap funding of delivering that service. Like we already established, there is a need for VGF. The first thing a PTSC does is to acknowledge that there is a need for VGF and defines the boundary conditions on what exactly is efficient service. And so as long as the STU delivers on the defined KPIs, the rest of the losses need to be absorbed by the government. So this PTSC actually codifies this whole process and provides details on whether this VGF will be monthly or a quarterly or annually VGF, and where is the money coming from? Either there's some tax or a government budget, or where is it coming from? All of this can be defined in the PTSC. So the details of PTSC is also quite important. So because it is a contract, and so there are several key items to be mentioned in that. The quantity of services, let's say 3,000 buses, 4,000 buses, whatever it is. Quality of services, punctuality, reliability, air-conditioned buses, all of these details. Then whether you have them as in-house operation or as gross cost contract, what is the VGF, what is the tariff. So let's say today your tariff, suppose women are paying 10 rupees per ticket on average, and tomorrow it is announced that all women can travel for free. So that is codified in the PTSC saying that as per these fair conditions, this is the VGF, but tomorrow if the policy decisions impact these conditions, then my VGF also changes. That's the government commitment to the bus agency, which will ensure consistency in VGF. So even today, there, like I showed earlier, almost 13% is provided by the government. It's just that there is no visibility of that 13%. It varies a lot. For the year 1920, it was 13%. The next year, it may be lower or higher. It varies a lot. So what VGF does, this PTSC does, is to provide visibility of funding beforehand, so that the bus agency can plan for a 4-year, 5-year timeline that, okay, now that I'm issued of this VGF, let me focus on service quality and service volume and expand to this level and codify that in the business plan saying, okay, I'll go from X to Y and I need so much VGF. It can also define other things like how this contract is managed, what are the tasks of, I mean, that like any contract would have what are the rights and obligations, tasks, and the items that will be covered, infrastructure, capex, opex, all of that. So that is so far that's the theory of what a PTSC can be or should be. So as World Bank, this is being implemented in the city of Chennai as a part of the Chennai City Partnership. So the Chennai City Partnership itself is a multi-pronged, multi-sectoral program. It includes transport, housing, water, and other sectors. So I am involved in the transport sector, and the lead for this is Gerald Olivier, the lead transport specialist at the World Bank. So we have worked on this to develop a PTSC for the case of Chennai. So as a part of the Chennai City Partnership, even as we were developing the program, government intended to increase. MTC has been facing the same issues as every other STU in India, fleet being stagnant, fluctuating funding requirements, but demand not being met. So we identified PTSC as the way to go to transform the overall system. So what we proposed is to have a PTSC between the government, the state government, which is the Transport Department of Government of Tamil Nadu, and MTC, the Metropolitan Transport Corporation, which runs bus services in Chennai. Apart from this regulatory reform, the partnership also has some funding for procurement of 1,000 buses on a gross cost contract basis. Like I mentioned earlier, we need to actually reduce the cost of service delivery wherever possible. And still, if you make losses, that can be compensated by the government. Right now, a majority of the buses in MTC are actually operated in-house. The traditional way of buying the bus, having staff and operating them. And the cost of operations has gone significantly high over a period of time. Because the staff salaries are outside the corporation control, they are set by government rules and government staff costs are higher. So the one reform was to move towards gross cost contract to reduce staff cost. And at the same time, now this since the inception of this project till now, the electric bus story in India advanced so much that these buses will also be electric. So the twin-pronged savings of business model and technology transition will be tapped into, and the rest of the VGF will be met by the PTSC. Separately, there are other activities to complement, to set up a gender lab to make women safe and activities towards that. And this is a 5-year program. This link gives details of all the program details. But just the MTC, the Metropolitan Transport Corporation specific components are the following. So there is authority also being set up, like many other cities. The roads, the buses, the metro, they are all managed by different companies, and so there is limited coordination while they take up different activities. So there is a separate Chennai Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority that was on paper but not very active previously. Through this Chennai City Partnership, now KUMTA is a very strong institution in Chennai, doing several multimodal integration efforts and several interdepartmental coordination efforts also. But I'm focusing on the buses. So what a DLI here is, sorry about so many acronyms being here, because these are all part of other documents. So that's why it's being repeated here. So the
Yes,
DLI,
yes. Sorry, Ravi, about that. Please don't hesitate to tell us again the meaning of acronyms, because there are really a lot of them. Thanks.
Yeah. So in this case, DLI is a disbursement linked indicator. So what happens when a multilateral institution provides a loan is that there are clear indicators set on that. So the program needs to achieve those indicators for the payment to be disbursed. So what we also see as an institutional issue in India is the way they are managed. A lot of times the Indian administrative service officers who are in charge of a particular institution may get transferred through that's why the system is set up. People get transferred over a period of time, some get promoted, some get transferred. So because of this reason, to have a vision and implementing it over a 4 or 5 year period sometimes becomes difficult because the people in charge of the vision keep changing. So the interpretation of the vision also can change. The advantage of a World Bank type project is that there is a clear DLI set. So irrespective of the people in charge, I mean, initially it is discussed and negotiated on what exactly the indicator should be. And once it is agreed upon by the parties, that is frozen. And after that, over a 3 or 5 year period of time, whatever is the timeline of the project, this gets executed. So I see a lot of value in multilaterals actually working on public transport and particularly buses because of this particular reason, where the goals are set at the beginning and you work over a long period of time to actually achieve them rather than changing the goalpost once in a while. So the DLI, particularly for buses, was to have performance-based contract for service delivery. So performance-based contract between the government and MTC, the bus agency overall, and within MTC, the gross cost contract, where 1,000 new buses are procured as a gross cost contract. So the overall DLI is divided into 3 components. First was to sign the PTSC between the Transport Department and the MTC, which is actually done now, but because it's not a public document, I'm unable to show the details. There are actually much more many more details on the theory I explained earlier on what a PTSC should be. I mean, we started and we learned over 3 years. It was not easy because this is the first PTSC being signed in India on what indicators to use. And there's a lot of negotiation that goes into the exact indicator actually. So do I have a slide on that? I think I have a slide. I'll come back to those points later. But the program itself is that there are disbursement linked indicators and then there are other results complementary. So eventually yeah.
Sorry, Ravi, just a quick clarification. The first PTSC, the sense that was there any, is this a substantial difference from what DIMS uses for the gross cost contracts in Delhi?
Yeah.
So, and was there any learnings from the DIMS experience, or are they completely de novo kind of experiences?
So DIMS was actually a fresh institution created, and they have so DIMS directly has a budget at the central level. Actually, if you see the state Delhi government budget, there is an item for DIMS directly. So whatever is the loss is being compensated. So DIMS has performance indicators for the private operator, but DIMS as a whole, I don't think has performance indicators. So what we are trying to put in here is actually this is the slide that can explain that. So let's say, so what we have in Chennai now is that the State Transport Department has a PTSC, has a list of KPIs for MTC overall, which includes KPIs for its in-house buses and outsourced buses separately, and as a corporation they have a target. But in case of DIMS, so this intermediate layer is missing. Actually, there are 2 separate layers. There is DTC, Delhi Transport Corporation, which until now had in-house, now moving to GCC. And separately, there is DIMS. But there are no targets actually for DIMS from what I know. So there are targets for the operator that you need to have X kilometers service delivered. Whereas the kind of KPIs that are here in the MTC KPI also have efficiency ones, like so customer satisfaction improvement, so that over a 5 year period, the customer satisfaction has to go from 100 to 130. So there is a baseline set today, and you need to increase by 30%. Similarly, there are targets on occupancy ratio, on how many people use the bus. So what DIMS has is more service or supply oriented indicators, but not really outcome oriented or people oriented indicators. A lot of focus for us has been on customer satisfaction improvement. But you can say actually DIMS is one of the best case studies until now in India. We just try to go one step ahead to have more customer focus and outcome orientation here. So those are listed in the results actually. So there is a target on how many women are feeling unsafe while using buses. There are also performance targets on non-traffic revenue increase, service performance. There are also customer satisfaction surveys. Like I said, now every year MTC will take up customer satisfaction surveys. So all of these are codified, and because there is a target set, there is a track record, and every year the business plan can be updated. So the other thing about this PTSC and the business plan is that PTSC is a contract linked to a business plan. So the business plan is a safety valve. So let's say you take an ambitious target today that I'll increase my occupancy ratio or percentage of bus space occupied from 60% to 70%. 1 year down the line, you realize that that was too ambitious or that was too unambitious. I mean, that was not so great. So you want to increase it. So for the next year, you can change the target and assess the financial implication and then get the budgetary commitment. So that's how it works. There are several KPIs that can be put. I'm not giving the final ones because that's not a public document. Some of these are picked and included in the PTSs. Some which are not here are also included, the crew ratio and others. So these are typical key performance indicators on the availability, supply indicators like kilometers of service delivered, how many households are covered, what is the schedule adherence. A lot of times there are schedules which are not updated over a period of time. So that is codified here. So you need to have an updated schedule. What is the crowding, safety, satisfaction, and financial performance, priority measures. In fact, when I posted that I'm going to speak at this, someone commented on LinkedIn that we need to talk about BRT. Why isn't BRT happening? So BRT in India started, but there was, of course, physical segregation of space and people did not like losing space to public transport. But also, more practically, there were bus lanes created without buses, and there were not enough buses because of all these issues. So we actually put the cart before the horse in a way with the BRT. Outside the bigger policy philosophical issues of whose space it is, there is a more practical issue of what is the service you are delivering. So you need to have good quality service to have a bus lane and a BRT. So this is the first step towards that. So I think those are the main points. But again, I would like to reiterate that just doing this will not solve all of our problems. So suppose you are starting in a new city, the way to go about it is that new city or a state. So first you diagnose the existing situation. An existing situation can be diagnosed on all these parameters on top, which is the availability of service. How many buses do you have? How many do you actually need? Then the performance of existing service. The whole point about can we fund inefficiency? How efficient are the services? We need to establish that through all the KPIs. Then the institutional framework, each department, part of the transport department, or DIMS is part of the state government already. There's no arm length relation or a target given to DIMS. So like MTC has now. So what is that framework that is needed and what exists today? The funding and financing requirements in the private sector environment. Because we need much more bus service and all of that cannot be met by public agencies. There has to be private investments, and that's what we are seeing in gross cost contracts, that as long as you pay on time, there is enough interest to invest in public transport now. And it is actually cheaper than government providing its own service. So once the baseline is established, you develop strategies to improve. We broadly do it in 4 categories. The service design itself, on which routes to operate, what time of the day, all of that, what kind of bus. Then the service delivery, on how efficient the bus service is, kilometers operated, punctuality, customer satisfaction, safety, all of that comes under the delivery. So once the service is taken care of, properly designed and delivered, there is need for funding and financing, where a PTSC comes into the picture, and then the institutional framework or the government policy that enables all of this. So, and then there are other enabling requirements, like you need to have a proper intelligent transport system to manage the whole service, provide real-time information to people, provide digital ticketing. So there are so many other innovations on the digital side that can improve customer satisfaction and also ensure performance efficiency of the service. Also contracting. So now more and more of bus services are now delivered by private operators, and timely payment is very, very important. Nobody is actually putting their own money. So there is a bank or NBFC providing a loan or equity investor putting in capital. So all of that depends on timely payment and contract management to ensure you've done your billing properly on time and paid is very, very important. So all of that enabling ecosystem is important, and eventually the skill sets. I mean, again, I've not covered enough on that in this presentation, but the kind of capacity in the bus agencies hasn't really changed over the last 30-40 years, I think. So we need to have more people delivering on all of these topics, which needs to come in also. So at this, I will stop, and maybe if there's any questions or comments, I'll take them.
Yes, thank you very much, Ravi, for this very rich presentation in which you shared with us many data and on the, which highlight quite clearly the many dimensions of this problem. So there are questions. There are already 2 questions in the chat box. So I'm going to start with them. Arkadja, would you like to ask your question? I think you must be unmuted now. Or should I read your question?
Yeah, I read the question on why whether APSRTC, KSRTC are more efficient than the others, and the institutional architecture on the government side. So it is true that APSRTC, KSRTC are more efficient. So across, so Government of India, there is Central Institute of Road Transport, which publishes performance data of bus corporations every year. And typically, APSRTC, KSRTC, TSRTC, Telangana always show up among the top performers. Why that is? I mean, just the institutions actually. So when I worked very closely with these corporations, and that is primarily because there is a very strong process set, I feel. So irrespective of the managing director or the director at a depot level on a day-to-day basis, what exactly needs to be done so to make sure the bus goes out and operates and revenue is collected, reconciled, deposited. So the whole process is very clearly codified, and over a period of time, it doesn't really change. In some of the other corporations, we also see that bus is idle, somebody is standing at the bus stop, okay, let me put this bus there. But then is that supposed to be going on that route? Does the passenger need an air conditioned service or a non-air conditioned service? So there's some level of demand responsiveness needed, but it can't be randomly operating without a process. So that way they are very process driven, and so they are more efficient. And can you say more about the institutional architecture on the government side? So right now, the overall institution is part of the legislative framework, right? So first, we have a Road Transport Corporation Act written back in 1960, I think, and we haven't really updated it. We have updated every other act, I think, except this Road Transport Corporations Act, based on which all of these corporations are formed, where it was said that capital has to be provided by the government and operations cost has to be recovered by the corporation themselves. And we are still stuck at that. Over a period of time, things have changed and there is more need for viability gap funding, but the act hasn't changed. And so these corporations are still functioning in that framework where RTCs are part of the transport department in many cases. In some cities, they are part of the municipal corporation. And every year they go to the state or the city with a budget request for the next year, which typically gets downsized. And most of that is, one is the budget is discretionary. On the other hand, the bus agency also doesn't have a clear vision. So they just go there asking, can we get X number of buses? No, you get only half X or 0.25X. But what a business plan does is that there is a clear vision that, okay, I want to go from this to this because of these reasons. And hopefully there is more consistency in funding. With just the business plan, you can just hope. With the public transport service contract, it is codified to have assured budget support. So I hope that answers your question. There's an anonymous question. Maybe I'll just read and respond.
Yeah, please do read the question.
demand estimation across routes. Lack of accurate data is a problem, and do you think government will do something to provide relevant data to schedule more? So scheduling is another topic, right? So if I get started on that, I'll take a long time because that's my whole PhD. And so it is true that we are operating in a very limited data environment in India. And more importantly, the recognition that data needs to lead to decision making is the bigger problem. So right now, whoever is in charge takes decisions based on their intuition. Okay, maybe this route should have more buses, or the other route. There is a railway station, maybe we should have more buses. So it's about a lot of trial and error. And we think that is how it should be, actually. That is the reason why we do trial and error. There is a lot of data in the system also, ticketing data, vehicle tracking data, and people are searching online. There's so much data online. There is basic static data also. The city has property tax data forever, where people live, where do they work, where do they go to school. So there is enough data in the ecosystem somewhere, but that has to come together to a proper planning setup, for which there needs to be recognition that that needs to be done. And secondly, within the government, the capacity to do it is limited. So once in a while, we actually find officers who believe this is important, it needs to be done, but they don't have in-house capacity. By the time they find a consultant or academic institution who can help, the person may change. And so the continuity may or may not be there. So it's not institutionalized, the data-driven decision making. And so it is up to chance that it can happen sometimes.
Okay. So
Yeah,
then we
then
have
there is
a question by Rijul. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I cannot control muting and unmuting people, so I think I'm going to read aloud their questions. How does the Delhi's recent premium bus aggregator scheme fit into improving service reliability and enabling mode shifts?
Yeah, so that will cater to a particular market segment. And the whole point of the aggregator scheme is that there are on-demand service providers who can modify the route based on people's travel demand. And that was not allowed until now because we had very rigid regulations where you are either operating as a fixed route service or as a point-to-point taxi-like service, but you can't be a public transport which operates a flexible route. So which is opening up a new market theoretically, but I feel that that's a niche market actually. So by design, buses are large, 12 meters, 9 meters by 2 meters. So the geometry will not allow you to randomly move here and there. And transport in general is a peak hour game, right? So we work or go to school in the morning or come back in the evening. So there is 6 hours of demand only during the day. And that's where all the demand happens. So the on demand is basically 6 hours of demand. And so during that demand, you want to maximize your supply. So you'll put the biggest bus you can put for that, to maximize your demand. But then the asset is lying idle for the rest of the day. So there is a lot of inefficiency built into on-demand services. The concept of a public transport system is to have fixed route, fixed schedule service. You can have slightly lower service in the off-peak and manage crew schedules a little bit, but you still have relatively 60-70% of the service being provided even in the off-peak hours. And that's how they manage the cost through the day. So the profitability of on-demand bus services is yet to be established. So, but at least we have to try. We can't just not allow and assume that it won't work. So let's see how it goes.
Okay, and then Shagun Gupta has actually two questions. Shagun, are you unmuted? I guess not. So, okay, the first question is, how do we account for the attitudinal shift needed to encourage people to use public transport in certain cities? There is a plausible, clear class-based explanation for why the uptake may suffer even with better planning. And in addition, she says, last mile connectivity is often cited as a problem and lack of disability accessible infrastructure. Buses may be accessible, but bus stops are not, for instance. These are these institutions in the middle that then come up, and some might argue that they create jobs too.
Yeah. So the attitude shift, so some people So actually, that is a elite problem, I would say, that we are saying that some people just want to use their own cars. But those are only a minor fraction of the population. Even though we see cars everywhere, they take up a lot of space, but the people in cars are quite limited actually. So those people, out of those people also, right now the services are so limited that we can't confidently say they need to move to buses because there is not enough service available if people actually move to buses. But the two-wheeler users can definitely shift to bus. If there's no class issue with two-wheelers, I think it's just a service issue. And again, we come back to the service. I would focus on the supply first. The bus lanes is where class issue comes, where you just don't want to exceed space to bus while cars are in traffic. But in general, service, I would put supply first more than attitude. Supply gap first. And second, on the last mile connectivity and disabled people's access. The majority, so first for people who are accessing not the disabled, but majority of bus users are actually within 500 meters to 1 kilometer of their bus stop because we have a lot of network coverage, not enough service on the network. So people are mostly walking and for them actually for metro users last mile is often a problem because they may access access by longer distance 3 to 4 kilometers. For buses it's not such a big issue, I would say. But the disabled people's access to bus is definitely a problem. And yeah, access to the bus stop, at the bus stop, into the bus. We don't still have low floor buses. We have, uh, I mean, actually 650 mm floor height or 900 mm floor height buses, which are basically inaccessible for disabled people. So there's a lot to be done there. I mean, that's a much longer game for sure. I mean, we need to do much more than what we have right now.
Okay, I actually like to ask a follow-up question to the first question by Shagun, because hearing you, I remember quite passionate debates in the daily press when the BRT system was being introduced, and there was very much a clash between people defending, the cars versus people defending public transport at that time. But I was wondering, it seems to me that you did not put too much emphasis on the political factor in your presentation of the complexity of the problem. And I wanted to know whether, in your opinion, the new salience today of the air pollution issue, does it make it more easy perhaps for state governments to impose the bus, insofar as buses are going to disturb car owners to some extent, inevitably?
Yeah, it is an issue for sure. So somehow we still don't want to inconvenience cars, that's for sure. So the air pollution issue has advanced public transport for sure. So Delhi now has 8,000 buses. I remember for the longest time they were unable to procure buses because so many procurement issues, some court cases here and there. But one with electric buses, things are much more clearer and more and more momentum, public momentum. There is actually a dedicated green cess which is used for public transport. There's a lot of money now earmarked for public transport because of air pollution. So the service supply increased, but we still somehow think that cars don't shift to public transport because of these attitude issues that I want to use my car. Of course, everybody wants to travel comfortably, but so that we need to reduce car space. That's what I was trying to say earlier. There are many corridors in Delhi that actually need a dedicated bus lanes. We have more buses stuck in congestion and it is slower. So if I eventually need to go to my office or school or hospital on time, right? So that's my primary criteria and then I choose the mode. Right now, we don't have that despite the newer, bigger fleet size we have. And that's a political shift that still hasn't happened anywhere in India. We still think car users are taxpayers and we need to facilitate them with roads, parking, flyovers, all of that.
Okay. All right, we have quite a lot of new questions coming up in the chat box. So Karina Singh is asking, is there a provision for public participation in the process, particularly in formulating key performance indicators relating to customer satisfaction?
Yeah, I mean, there should definitely be public participation, particularly for route network design, actually. So in Europe, in London or some of the other cities, so first they publish route network, seek feedback. When they change the route network, also there is consultation done with the local stakeholders on we are changing this route because we'll increase frequency. So there are different trade-offs on frequency versus coverage versus reliability. So those are explained to people, negotiated, agreed upon, which is a long drawn process. And here we first don't plan based on data, and it is more trial and error, and then we figure out on the go. So it's a bit, there's much more scope to involve public in the service design. A lot of times public is not really concerned with the institutional setup, whether you sign a PTSC or a GCC or whatever. They need a bus, and they're more concerned about those issues. So there is definitely scope to do that. And on customer satisfaction, actually, of course, we definitely think it should be measured. And so all of these things eventually come down to individual satisfaction levels. And transparency in publishing that is also very important. So that is one of the key parts of the things that we are doing in Chennai, where now every year MTC will carry out customer satisfaction. We define the key things like things that people care about, punctuality, safety, all of that, and then that is published. Singapore also does this over a period of time, and they have a university supporting them every year. I think that's a model we are trying to recreate in Chennai also.
Okay. Prakriti, I think you should be
Stephanie,
unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pato, you have a question?
No, I was just telling you that you now can unmute participants.
Right. I try to unmute Prakriti. So Prakriti, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, I can unmute people.
Prakriti.
Hello, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation. I wanted to ask your opinion on these free services given to the women or other section of the society in the context of inclusive services, public transportation services, and vis-a-vis the financial crunch that you talked about in your presentation.
Yeah. So it's a political thing rather than a inclusivity thing, actually. So we are seeing this that, I mean, I think Delhi started it and other states have picked up the trend. So Delhi first started with, I remember, giving free electricity to some extent and some gas connections free to some extent. After that, the next utility was public transport, and that was made free for women. And now we have Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, all of them implementing the same thing. But if you see in all of these states, the number of buses over a period of time have stagnated or actually reduced. So by giving buses for free, in fact, if you see the BMTC, the Bangalore Bus Agency's ridership numbers, so they are now lesser than pre-COVID numbers, despite women having free travel. So it is not actually leading to a lot of women taking up buses, or maybe it is leading to more women taking up buses, but for the city, the total number of people in buses actually hasn't really changed a lot. There's only so much capacity available. It's just that women are taking up more of that. Earlier, men were taking up more of that. So you can always argue that, oh, but women didn't have access to transport. So there may be that economic angle you can put, but from a city perspective, it hasn't actually led to more people using buses, significantly more people using buses, primarily because there's no way to actually accommodate many more people, the amount of services we have. And the second thing you actually asked about the budgetary thing. So if you see people before also, whatever limited customer satisfaction surveys we had, people always complained about lack of routes in their area or punctuality or speed or safety, but never about cost of travel. It was anyway cheap all the time. So it is less than 5%, 8% of people's household income. So it did not significantly increase their thing, but it definitely impacted the finances of the bus corporations significantly. They were anyway making losses, now they are making more losses. And this lack of PTSC in many states means that they have to go back to the negotiating table whenever every month when they have to claim the reimbursement. So at least in Chennai now they have a clear PTSC which says because of this political reason you get VGF. So it has impacted significantly the financial status of the bus corporation.
Thanks. Gaurav had a question too. Gaurav, you want to ask your question? Gaurav, are you there? Okay, so I'm going to
I think his point, I just read the question on how this PTSD, I mean, he's right that, for example, in Delhi, so a lot of buses were infused in 2010 during the Commonwealth Games. And for 10 years, there were no buses. And suddenly we have 5,800 buses being procured in this 2-year period, which is an issue. Some of the other states, Karnataka and all, actually have a more regular renewal of fleet. So that's what the business plan is intending to do actually in Chennai, to go from their current fleet of 3,500 buses to around 7,500 buses over the next 10 years, which includes fleet renewal as well as augmentation. And there was an annual bus procurement schedule given in the business plan. It can be subject to some revision annually, but the big picture is set and there is understanding that this is a regular process and not a once in a decade kind of process. Yeah. But that's a very, very important point that you mentioned. Yeah.
Gaurav, you want to follow up on this? I can see you're unmuted now.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie, but I think it's Ravi has addressed it all right. Just thinking because a lot of times the sustainability of any operation is dependent on the bus fleet. So, Ravi, in this these contracts, who sets these standards, and is there a provision to increase the number of buses in future, or do they maintain the same number of buses? I mean, how does it work in conditions of the contract, if you can tell?
Yeah, that's the whole so beauty of the public transport service contract, because it is a negotiated contract. It's not a top-down kind of approach. So the business plan is prepared by the bus corporation and presented to the government. And the government decides if that is adequate or it should be more ambitious or less ambitious, and agree upon it based on all these KPIs on the fleet, on the other all the KPIs that I mentioned. So that took actually more than a year in case of Chennai. So first the corporation had to prepare their own vision. After a lot of negotiation, there are operating requirements, there are financial constraints. So within them, they have different, this creative tension on where the corporation should be. Once that is done, then it has to be presented to the government. Then government change some of the KPIs that, oh, you need to have more aggressive target here. Oh, but we don't have finances to have so many buses. So there was a lot of back and forth based on which one vision is set. But every year it can also be updated. So there's nobody giving a target to anybody. It's a jointly agreed process. Yeah.
Okay, Isvarya, can you, yeah, I can see you, but you're muted. Okay, so your question, yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you can read my question. It's basically that when a city has multiple modes of public transport, we want people to shift to public transport, not specifically to buses. The problem usually is that all of the different agencies in charge of the different modes of transport want to set their own targets independent of another. So I'm not saying that this will bring down their numbers, I mean, in a negative way only, but then there is an effect on that. So the annual plan should also reflect on the other changes that are happening in the city. will transport department be the common point? And in different cities have different setups. Of course, you work with Chennai, so will Kumta have that kind of control over what kind of annual plans will have to be made, and will that impact the clauses of the contract as well? That's my question.
Yeah, you're right. The service target requires a lot of detailed planning. In case of Chennai, the business plan included some accessibility analysis of where is the metro growing and where they already have suburban rail and where are the access service coverage gaps. And so in the short term, the issue of overlapping services may not be a big issue because we have such a lot of backlog of services. So, but ideally, you are right that while planning, we need to have multimodal outlook. And so the business planning exercise should have some transport planning component also. It's not just accounting exercise of what would be the cost and revenue of a given service level. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has it been taken into consideration in Chennai so far?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So we did, I mean, not we, the MTC did the accessibility analysis of
Okay.
where the service gaps are to estimate. Actually, there are 5 scenarios of service levels that were analyzed based on which this number, the one of the scenarios was picked. So they have done based on benchmarks like X amount of buses for Y amount of population, on service coverage requirements, mode share targets of the mobility plan. So these are all considered while defining the target.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. And now we have a question by an anonymous participant. So, anonymous participant, do you want to speak? Okay, Ravi, do you want to read the question and
there is
address
a
it?
focus on metro and what happens to the small cities. So the advantage, so I agree that there is more focus on metro, but there is also more and more realization. There is actually a parliamentary standing committee report which showed that almost 45% of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs budget is for metros only. And so far we have about 1,000 kilometers of metro, I think, after 20 years of building them. So there is more and more recognition that metros can only provide so much of service, and there is a need for some alternative, but there is this with the advantage with electric buses is that it is also seen as an innovation and upgradation in technology. Previously, there was this outlook towards buses that there are these for the poor people, old vehicles, but now there is more and more emphasis with electric buses. So I'm still hopeful. And parallelly, this week, Minister of Housing and Minister of Heavy Industries is actually consulting several stakeholders, vehicle manufacturers, operators, everybody to induct 8 lakh buses in India, electric buses by 2030, and 2 lakh buses in the public bus agencies to augment their capacity by 25%. So there is emphasis on buses overall now. In small cities, big cities, for small cities, there is this PM e-bus Seva, which is only 10,000 buses. The need is much higher than that. But that's a start, and now there is a clear recognition from the national government that buses need viability gap funding, and the PM e-bus Seva program actually commits to viability gap funding over 12 years, which is the first time a national government program has done it. Typically, national programs are capex oriented. So now there is recognition that buses need VGF for the life cycle. So hopefully this is only the initial tranche of 10,000, and maybe this sets the precedence for much bigger scale.
Thanks. And one more question by Rashi Puri. Rashi, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I think her question is to whether a state level agency for public transport will help. I think that's a very important, good point that you raised. It is very, very important. If you see, there is no agency with the mandate of public transport actually. So we have municipal corporations whose job, if you read Municipal Corporation Act, it is about providing roads. There are bus agencies who just are formed for bus operations, which are under transport department, but the transport department is more of a regulatory agency on issuing permits, licenses, but not in charge of public transport provision itself. So we are actually lacking a authority for public transport at a state level. With MTC, there is some change, but there is a lot more still to be done. And that's a very important point. Even if at a national level, there is no agency whose job is to improve public transport. There are different agencies who can improve public transport if they want to, but nobody with a mandate to improve public transport. So Ministry of Road Transport, Heavy Industries, Urban Affairs, they can improve, but they're not required to improve buses. So that's a very important point and it needs to be done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Pato, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just asking, thanks, Stephanie, and thanks, Ravi. Ravi, recently, Chennai sort of started, looks like it's being serious about UMTA and it's been together. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this might sort of, what role that might play in the context of this kind of contracts and broadly in terms of providing these kinds of services going forward? I'm thinking of the various questions about regulation and the one about Aishwarya is about intermodal and border structures. So has there been discussions with UMTA or have you been on board in these kinds of contracting and things of that sort?
Yeah, in fact, when this program started, we were thinking of having a PTSC with the Kumta and not the transport department because they are in charge of all modes, and what Aishwarya was asking about having multimodality while planning for buses is important. So if the UMTA does it and issues the bus contract, by design, they are supposed to look at multimodal transport system and then define the bus role of buses within that. But our institutions have for decades been part of transport departments, and so that was too much of a shock to the system to put it all under the urban department. So we went ahead with the transport department. But in Chennai, there is a lot of focus at the state government to have a unified agency in Chennai, and that was a lot of World Bank can take some credit also for it because that was one of the disbursement linked indicators as a part of the Chennai City partnership, and World Bank put in a lot of effort towards strengthening the institution and defining the business rules and all of that. And going forward, while the business plan and VGF are with the transport department, the service Kumta is currently actually doing is planning to do a bus route rationalization study where this multimodal planning will be happening, where we look at expanding metro network, suburban rail, and then the buses within the overall context. And the city itself has grown from 1,000 square kilometer to 5,500 square kilometer. So what is the new service that is needed in the city? That kind of work is what Kumta is taking up now going forward. But on the regulatory space also, Kumta is now looking at IPT, the paratransit regulations. So there is a lot of shared auto service in the city. In the current transport department framework, you either operate as public transport or as a taxi, but not this aggregator type service that Delhi approved. So not just a bus aggregator, but how do we actually formalize the shared auto rickshaws and regulate them and plan them in accordance with other public transport systems? Right now, the public transport planning happens in a vacuum, assuming there is no competition, but we know there is. So that's what Kumta is trying to crack, which is quite a complicated problem. But they have actually strengthened the institution, very good, talented people in the Kumta trying to solve these problems. Yeah.
Thank you. Pato, you wanted to add?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
Do we have more questions? I don't see anything in the Q&R.
Actually, Stephanie, it would be nice since Ravi has been sort of in the World Bank and looking at some of these things. whether this kind of experience in Chennai and other places, is it sort of generating interests from other cities? Are just like the Delhi free bus system then ended up um, things happening in other states.
Yeah.
Is this kind of thing generating interest in other cities, even other cities in Tamil Nadu for that matter?
Yes.
Forget about other places. Do you see any rising interest in other places in these kinds of structures?
Yeah, so it has not become political yet, like the free bus system, but within the administrative circles, it has become quite talked about. Particularly in Tamil Nadu, they are actually, like you suggested, they are already thinking of, even while you are preparing PTSC, government wanted to do the same for the other corporations within Tamil Nadu. They have 7, I think, in total. So they were waiting for us to, because there are so many different ways of doing it, how to define the performance target, payments, all of that. So this is now finally sorted. Hopefully they'll expand to the others. The whole crux of a public transport service contract is transparency and value for money. So you are defining performance and tracking against it. There is transparency and value for money because there is this perceived inefficiency in the system that is addressed. So the finance departments are much more comfortable committing to budget with a PTSC rather than a blanket, okay, take 100 crores this year or 300 crores this year just because there is a good negotiating happening at the time. So there is interest actually. So there are discussions in Bangalore to have something similar. So it's been discussed for across Karnataka within Bangalore. So there are discussions going on. But this is actually not a straightforward process to just go out and announce. There is a lot of negotiation within the corporation with the transport department. But yeah, it's on the track, I would say.
Okay, so thank you so much, Ravi. I mean, this was you really went into this long series of questions to to tell us more about the great complexity of the issue, and we leave this session with some hope about the future possible development of bus transport systems in Indian cities. It's great to know that the sessions of the CPR-CSH Urban Workshop are recorded and are available on the website of the CPR, because I think your PowerPoint was extremely informative, and you probably didn't have enough time to give justice to it, but we will have a chance to go back to it. So thank you very much, Ravi. Thank you, all of you participants, for having remained with us in spite of this very technically imperfect session. And we'll meet you again in January for the next session of the Urban Workshop.
Yeah,
Thank
I'd
you,
like to
everybody.
also thank the audience for staying and then asking so many questions. A lot of times in digital sessions, we don't know if anybody is interested or so the questions show some interest. So thanks very much to the audience, and for CPR to pick up the topic. This is a topic not a lot of people are interested in. So thanks to Pada for organizing the whole thing. Thank you.